We would like to acknowledge the Yagara people and the Turrbal people as the traditional custodians of Meanjin, the lands in which we record this podcast today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land.
Welcome everyone to For the Health of It podcast, a Healthcare Australia podcast.
Made for healthcare professionals by nurses on the inside. My name is Jessica.
And my name is Xana, and we are HCAs Brand Ambassadors. And we have an exciting episode for you today. It is basically diving into the world of rural and remote nursing and rural and remote health, and basically the support networks and support systems that you can have while working and going to those kinds of places. Because like a lot of people that are listening, you've been in those rural and remote spaces, and it can also often feel that you are quite isolated from communities, from family, from friends, and having those extra supports is super, super helpful. So me and Jess both have experienced that, and we think this episode is going to be super helpful for all of you listening. So we are joined today by Laura. She is a mental health and sexual health nurse, but also a mental health educator for CRANA Plus. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in this pathway with CRANA Plus?
Sure. So thanks for having me. So as you said, Xana, my background and my bachelor's degree is mental health nursing, and I practiced as a mental health for a good 10 years before stepping out of that space and getting into more sexual health and education. So my position with CRANA came from, I interviewed for the position, applied for the position because I have experience working remote. So I've lived in Australia for 10 years. You can tell by my accent, I am not born here whatsoever. But, for about 8 of those years, I've worked in predominantly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander remote health. And so when this position came up with CRANA, I decided to apply because I do feel, I understand some of the challenges that remote clinicians face and how important mental health and wellbeing is when you work remote. Especially with the lack of resources that we have, as you guys are aware. So my role is, it's not a new role. So I have stepped into that role. We've just had a lovely educator leave, and so I've taken over the role. And they've been delivering workshops now across Australia for some time. So the workshops are, I guess the most popular one is a 30-minute reset that we can do with remote and rural clinicians, and also health workers, admin staff. It can be anyone that works rurally and remote. CRANA have also developed like a range of resources, which I know are gifted to you guys for your rural and remote clinicians. And they include stuff that we'll talk about maybe a little bit later on, but like self-care plans, really good information. We have emails go out called Mindful Monday every week. Again, I'll probably speak to that a little bit later on. But the reason I have a job is because I'm there to deliver free, flexible workshops for clinicians. So that's what my role is in CRANA Plus.
That's awesome. It's so great. And like we were speaking about before, Laura, it's so amazing having someone who does have that experience, and you have such extensive experience in the rural and remote space, and especially with those remote communities, that you can run those workshops and have that real bond with the nurses and the healthcare staff that are coming to you because you really understand what they're going through, which is amazing.
Yeah.
When you were doing your kind of work in the remote communities, were you aware about these courses and these workshops, or is this something that you've only just kind of found out about?
So I've done most of my work in South Australia and Queensland, and then I did a course with the Centre for Remote Health. It's a postgrad for remote health practice. So it's a course I'd 100% recommend to anyone looking at going in remote or rural practice, particularly in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health space. And it was when I was doing that qualification that I was introduced to CRANA. So they came and did a little workshop and a bit of a talk with remote and rural workers, just explaining who they are. And it was particularly focused around the bush support line, again, which I can go into a little bit later on when it comes to discussing what CRANA can offer. And that's how I became aware of them. But you might see, and I guess it's like similar, once you know the name, you might see posters around and recognise it now, so when I work up in the Cape, I'll see CRANA posters and CRANA pictures everywhere, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, so people are aware of who they are and what they do.
Yeah, we definitely have been aware of them for a long time, and especially with their rural and remote courses, but specifically these wellbeing courses. I mean, personally, myself, was not aware of these, that they had been run or have been run in the past. From the things you sent us, you obviously sent us a lot of information about all of this, but the wellbeing for the bush basically is kind of, I guess, the main kind of broad outline of kind of what you do with CRANA Plus. So how does kind of that wellbeing for the bush work in practice, and how can our rural and remote nurses and workers access this support?
Yeah, so I think as rural and remote workers, we're all aware of what good self-care and what well-being looks like. So we know the theory. And that's the thing, we don't want to talk to people in a way where they don't know. Like, people do know, it's just often that they might need a little bit of a reminder. But I guess it comes down to, thinking about where you are going. So we know that, you look at the 5 pillars of health. So we've got like relaxation, social interaction, sleep, exercise, eating and nutrition. So we know that they're really good for us. But in practice, you have to think about, if you're going to a remote community in the Kimberley and it's the wet season and there's flooding, maybe you're not going to have access to that fresh fruit and veg and meat to have kind of adequate nutrition. And also the same with sleep. My husband is a primary health nurse, and he does a lot of on-call. And I know he'll do back-to-back on-call because, we know that nurses are quite short-staffed. So he'll do first on-call, second on-call. And even though, the phone might not go throughout the night, as workers, that the phone could go out and then, it could go off. And so you don't sleep so well. And that goes for the drivers that he works alongside as well. And security, they have to be first and second on call. It's not just the nurses and doctors. And so their sleep can be quite compromised. And I think the same for like exercise. We know going for a run or doing some yoga or going for a swim might make us feel really good. But if you're going to a remote or a rural place where there's camp dogs that might run after you, or there's, there's no swimming pool, or there's no means to kind of access somewhere to go and do some exercise. We need to think about ways how we can incorporate that, away from resources that we might have access to in cities or even regional places. Yeah.
Wow.
So
it is
I think it's preparation. Yeah, definitely preparation.
I definitely find when you go on these contracts, it's impossible to kind of get a routine, because whether you're at home and you have a routine, just being a shift worker in general makes it just so difficult. But then when you're going into these remote communities, you're already dealing with the isolation of kind of being alone, away from family and friends. You might not have the best internet. It might be really hot. Like, it's really hard to leave the house. Like, all those things that we're trying to do to make ourselves have a nice, healthy kind of mental health space is a lot more difficult, and you need a lot more motivation, I guess, to try and get through it. So what type of services do you guys provide to help these nurses kind of focus on their mental health?
Yes, I think one really good thing, and that's in the Wellbeing for the Bush stuff that I dropped off to you both when I came down in when was I there? In December. So you'll see in that book that there's like a self-care plan, and I think we've also given some. That's it, yeah. So there's
holding up to the camera now.
So the self-care plan on page 15. Yeah, I don't know if you won't be able to see that.
No, background's gone.
But we've delivered some magnets as well. So these self-care plans, so they talk about what are your personal signs of stress, and what strategies you use personally, who you can call for support, and what activities you can include in your next routine. So it's one to do prior to you going on your contract. So, you get your contract and they're like, right, cool, you're going to Mount Isa for a month. I think, you do a bit of research into what you can access in Mount Isa, what the shops are like, what exercise you can get into, what your shift pattern might be, and then also making notes on this care plan before you go out, because we know when we feel well and we feel recharged and motivated, like we can think quite clearly, and we can reflect back and see, actually, like that was a bit of an early warning sign for me, or this is what makes me feel good. But when we're up there and we're in it, it can be quite hard to think quite clearly. So I do think that doing these plans are an amazing idea, probably before you go on your contract. And, you could even sit down with a loved one or a friend, and think about, like I need to call you once a week and put that on your care plan or like your strategy plan. And they know if then you've not called them that week, there might be something going on and they need to touch base with you. So I think that that's really important to kind of build that support. So that's definitely a really good resource that CRANA have. Aside from that, we've got, so there's quite a few things that they've got going on, which I've made a heap of notes here. So we have webinars and we have podcasts as well on the CRANA website. There's also a Mindful Mondays newsletter that goes out to remote workers. So you can sign up for that, or you can just look on the website and they've got them all archived. And they're written by psychologists who work on the bush support line. And it can be anything, from workplace conflict. Today, Steph has sent out an amazing one about the 5 love languages. So it can be anything. So really, really interesting. The feedback from them is amazing. And also, away from CRANA, there's a really good podcast called A Nurse Out Where. So that's done by Danielle Causa, who is in fact a remote health nurse. That she does the podcast on her, like in her spare time. And she gets all kinds of different people on there talking about their experience working remote. And I think sometimes, we need a little bit of validation to understand what we're going through can be quite normal and other people are feeling it, and it makes us feel a little bit less alone. So I think that there are all really good resources. The workshops I run, so the Wellbeing workshops, are about 30 minutes long. We understand that remote workers, are tight for time. They don't necessarily want to spend the lunch break, like sat listening to me yap on about wellbeing. So we know to kind of keep it short and sweet and keep it relevant as well. So anyone can access those. We usually do those as like an in-service to a team of people. It can be a big team, a small team. It doesn't really matter. And all you need to do is bob through a request through our email, which is wellbeing@crana.org.au. And I'll give that, that information to you guys at the end. Yes, I think that's kind of most of the resources that CRANA Plus offer in regards to the wellbeing side of stuff.
That's so amazing. It's so great that there's so many options, because obviously, like you said, we're all busy. We all have so many things to do. If the workshop isn't something that you can kind of fit in that day or that week, that you can reflect on your care plan or your self-care plan that you've kind of made before going, and reflect on that to try and make a plan for moving forward. So that's really great. And can you, run through a little bit what you do in those wellbeing workshops, in the 30-minute wellbeing reset workshops? How do those kind of get structured, and is it something that you do once and then you can reach out again later, or is it kind of an ongoing workshop?
Predominantly it's about talking about wellbeing in the bush, right? So again, we all know this stuff. We all know how to take care of ourselves. We talk to our clients about it every day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we put it into practice. So it's a bit of a reminder to stop, take care of yourself. And people might have filled out these self-care plans and then pop them in the bottom of the suitcase, or, put them in the bottom of the esky and the chickens leaked all over it. It's a reminder to kind of dig them out and have a bit of a look back on them and check in with yourself. So we're not teaching things that people don't already know, but we are a bit of a check-in, a hey, how are you, and a reminder as to how to kind of keep your well-being when working remote, for sure.
Yeah. I love that concept of your own care plan. I've never actually heard that kind of, we always have care plans for our patients, so it's actually something quite easy that we can put into our own schedules. I actually really like that. And it's like the biggest and most important part that I've kind of got out of this episode is you can't pour from an empty cup, and unfortunately when you're a healthcare worker, sometimes we just give, and then sometimes we just crash like we do, and we're exhausted and we're just not looking after ourselves. But we can care for people better when we are filling our own cup and looking after ourselves more. And this book is amazing. Definitely. I've been having a browse. I know page 20 is really good. It's got Wellbeing for the Bush, the 5 senses technique. I really like that page. I might take a photo and put it in our Healthcare Australia Instagram page, because it's actually amazing. Yeah.
Whatever you want to take from it, it's a really good reason, and it's so beautifully done. And you'll see at the back as well, because I think one thing to acknowledge is it can get, when you're working remote, I mean, anyway in life, but when you're working remote in particular and you're isolated and you're away from family, it can get to the point where it crosses over into kind of some more worrying mental health stuff. And so, reaching out to, Beyond Blue and that kind of thing. And those resources are in the back as well. And yeah, I mean, I know you guys are going to ask me a question on the Bush support line, so I'm not going to talk about that right now.
I was just about to.
You read our mind.
But if you want to go ahead and tell us about that Bush support line, that would be amazing, because I didn't know about it at all, and I know that a lot of us that are listening and a lot of nurses and stuff know about EAP and that access where we can get employment assistance program and speak to someone. But this Bush support line is even more kind of tailored towards these rural and remote nurses and workers, that the people listening actually have experience in that space, which is even more of a connection that those people are kind of going to understand where you're coming from, and it's going to be able to break that barrier and actually make them feel a lot more comfortable sharing those vulnerabilities. So can you just tell us a little bit about the Bush support line and how that can help?
100%. So I think when people think of CRANA, they think of MEC-REC and Bush support, like it's such a good service. So the Bush support line, it's a free, completely confidential 24-hour support line. So you can access it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's for all health workers and working in rural, remote and isolated communities. Anyone working in the health sphere can access the service. That includes, your midwives, your occupational therapists, your dentists, your health workers, your drivers, your admin, and also students can access it, and families of remote workers. So if you're the partner of a remote worker and you're up in a community, you can also access this line as well. So it's staffed by psychologists, and they've all got remote and cross-cultural experience. So you're dealing with people that have been there and might have shared similar experiences to what you're experiencing. It is available from anywhere in Australia, and it's available every day of the year. So this is a completely 365-day-a-year manned phone line. So it's a 1-800 number, which I'll say now so people can write it down. So it's 1-800-805-391. I guess the only barrier to accessing this would be if you were in a place without phone reception. But now and again that could happen with the weather, but you're almost always going to have phone signal somewhere where you are. So you can access the Bush support line and EAP. It's not like you've got to access one or the other. It's just there in case people need it and in case people want to speak to somebody. There is no time limit on the phone call. It's not like you call and you get 15 minutes. It's not like that whatsoever. The conversation is there to be had, and I think it's a really important conversation to have, especially if you're struggling when you're working remote. Yeah,
that's so incredible. It really is so helpful for nurses that are working, or workers that are working in those spaces, because you never know what can happen. It's so different to how your life is back home, and you see some things and hear about things that often rock you. So it's nice to be able to access that 24/7, especially knowing that you don't have to call between 9 and 5 and wait the next day to deal with it. You can actually deal with that in that moment, which is great.
Yeah, and I think the importance of, and drawing on my own experience, I worked in a community that can be quite volatile, and I worked there for some years, and at the time my husband wasn't a nurse, so I'd come home and he'd be like, how's your week? And I didn't want to speak to him, and I'd be quite withdrawn, and you're trying to process all of this quite horrendous stuff that you've seen happen and quite unique experiences. And then you try and talk to your partner about it, who's living their best life in like Cairns or wherever it is, and they don't get it, and it's not their fault, but how can you possibly understand if you've not experienced it? So, I wish I would have known about the Bush support line then, and because it would have been very, very helpful for me. So hopefully it is a tool that people can access, going forward.
So good. It's been so amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. But before we go, I would love to know, obviously you have so much experience in the rural and remote space. You love this space. What would you say to someone that, is thinking about joining an agency or moving bush and doing this remote lifestyle? Do you have any advice for them if they're a little bit apprehensive or scared to kind of take that first leap?
You look at these places on the map and you think, oh my gosh. But what I would say is, it's the most rewarding career. You'll meet the most beautiful people. But, you know, to provide a service to people that live rural and remote, I think it's super important to be up on your education, both, you know, professionally and culturally. I think that's super important. I think speaking to other nurses or doctors or health workers or admin officers that have worked in those places is really important, understanding other people's experience, and also learning from other people's experience. And I think also, you know, if you're going to do a long contract, so say if you're picking up a contract for 9 months, planning out before you go when you're going to take some leave throughout that duration, because going up there and smashing out 9 months is not going to work. Like, you need to take some time away for yourself, and also time to reconnect with family, friends, or whoever that may be. So I think do it, 100% do it. It will change your life. I think once you go rural and remote, you've got to be prepared never to be able to work in a city ever again. You know, that's speaking for, you know, I guess that's how I feel. But yeah, like, definitely prepare yourself in whatever way you can, for sure.
Yeah, well, we definitely agree with that, because we love rural and remote nursing and we love that space so much. And you're so right. There's just nothing like it, really. I mean, working in the city is great as well, and it's great to have a break. But yeah, there's nothing really like helping people in those communities. It's just something super special. And it really just takes, you know, your empathetic nursing side just to a whole nother level. And it really just makes you feel like you're really making a difference, which is what we all want to do. So, yeah. Thank you so much for today.
No, thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you. And if you need anything, please let me know and I'll send it through. And
we will. And we'll put everything in the show notes as well. We'll put the bush support line if you guys missed that one. Everything will go on the show notes, so just pop down there. We'll also pop your details in if they want to email you through any questions as well.
Thanks, Xana. That's great.
Amazing.
Thanks,
Laura.
Bye, Laura.
Thank you. All right, I might see you in a few weeks.
Yes.